It's good to have big visions of where we see ourselves or where we want to go. And it seems like this time of year, as we approach the new year, it becomes more prevalent than ever. However, I have found personally that reverse engineering that goal into something more manageable is a much more effective strategy. And even more so than that, take action today and don't become complacent and wait for the new year to begin whatever it is you want to try. This is the No Excuse to Miss podcast. Welcome to the No Excuse to Miss podcast. I am your host, Scott Volquartsen, and this week I have our Director of Marketing, Chad Wittrock, joining us. How are you doing today, Chad?
I'm doing great. Great to have there. Nice and cool here in Iowa.
The seasons have definitely changed.
Yep.
And, it's perfect segue. Speaking of the seasons changing, we're getting towards that time of year where everybody is starting to look ahead to 2022. They are starting to put together the New Year's resolutions that some people love, some people hate. And along those same lines, I did a post last week about how I like to stick to a regimented routine. It helps me, to avoid becoming complacent. And it's one of those things that I found applies to both my business and personal life. And it obviously resonated with others because I received a lot of messages in regard to that.
Yeah, I think that's, we touched on this a lot yesterday, and it kind of spurred this idea to bring it onto the podcast, is just how many people really start to coast this time of year. So we brought up this idea of separation season, if you want to touch on that.
Yeah, so I heard that term the other day, and I thought it perfectly applied to us. Ed Milet referred to separation season as kind of that time between Thanksgiving and New Year's, where so many people they just kind of want to coast through the end of the year, and they start making all their plans for January. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that.
They want to put all their action steps into the next year.
Yes. So basically taking the last few weeks of the year off.
Right.
And what he talks about, and I completely agree with, is it's a perfect time that you can kind of separate yourself from the pack.
Yep.
You can do it personally. You gain 3-4 weeks on, your goal for 2022. You can do it business-wise, and if your competitors are kind of doing the same thing, taking that time off, you can really, kind of separate yourself from them over the next few weeks.
Yeah, I think that's a great strategy. I think it's so easy right now, and that's not to say don't enjoy the holidays and don't enjoy this time of year, but I think it's really easy to get pulled into that trap of putting things off.
Yeah, and just kind of throwing all the discipline that people show typically the first 11 months of the year.
Yep.
Kind of goes out the window here over the next 4 weeks.
Well, it's very easy to make concessions right now. So, yeah, I think that's great. So,
and like you said, it's not that you can't enjoy it, but I think that problem becomes if you take 3-4 weeks off from your routine, your structure, for a lot of people, it's really hard to just dive right back in January.
Yeah.
Which is why we probably see so many failed New Year's resolutions.
Well, I think that when you dive back in, you almost feel like you're behind, or you can get that sense of overwhelm because you almost feel like you're playing catch up.
That's a great point.
So that's how I take it. So I guess transitioning from that and that complacency, if you're on a plateau or you feel like you're coming into a plateau this time of year, what's your advice to maybe keep going and setting those steps, getting past that phase of wanting to read one more book, want to learn one more thing before I take action?
So that was kind of the gist of my post that I did, was that for a long time, I would justify reading one more book, listening to that one more podcast, attending one more conference, whatever, insert X, whatever you want to talk about there.
I'm going to learn one more thing and then I'm going to do it.
Yes. And then I'm going to go do it, where in reality, a lot of times we know what needs to be done.
Yep.
But it's almost like a lazy man's way out to say, and it's acceptable by society to say, I got to read this book and then I'm going to start doing this.
Well, yeah. And in today's world, we have every bit of information at our fingertips. It's easy to say, I don't know enough to start.
Yes. And I've had this happen to me many times. You eventually have information overload where you have paralysis by analysis, and you don't know what to do because, one book, I'll use it for business or marketing, whatever. One book will say you need to do this. One book says you need to do this. Yeah. And then you get overwhelmed and you actually don't do anything.
Yeah, because you feel like your information is actually contradicting itself. So then you really don't feel like you can take action.
Correct. And we've even learned that on the business side is you really just have to be proactive with what you're doing with your business.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you want to be aware or cognizant of what your competitors are doing. But if you're constantly reacting to what they're doing, you're always going to be behind.
Yeah, you can't live there.
And you can't live there. You're back to that overwhelm of, I got to do this, this, and this to get caught up with them.
Yep.
Where if you're proactive and you're dialed in on what you're doing, it's a much easier way to go.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think it makes moving forward that much easier.
And the other piece of that is if you are constantly trying to be reactive, you're not really ever mastering like one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you see a competitor that, I'll go back to the marketing example that is dialed in on, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, let's say.
Yep.
And you're just starting out, it's impossible to get dialed in on all three of those.
Yeah.
You really have to just pick one that's your focus and go from there.
Yeah, we talk about that from time to time too. If you feel like you need to be present everywhere and none of that's getting your full attention, you end up with kind of a lackluster presence on everything. It's easier to dial in and focus on one area and get that in place exactly where you want it and then look at moving to the next thing. I think that really goes down to where you can get hung up on multitasking or small details that really derail bigger things.
And I think as you say that, it hit me that that's kind of what our business model has been for the last 30 years, being dialed in on the 22s.
Right. Yeah.
So many people will say, when you guys are going to move from rimfire? And we want to, we do have plans to do that. But our business philosophy is to completely maximize what we can do on the rimfire side of things.
Yep. Before switching. And, because the last thing in the world we want to do is spread ourselves too thin that we dive into the centerfire market, regardless of where that might be. Yep.
And then we lose some of what we currently have on the rimfire side of things.
Right. I think the philosophy too is, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, is you've always kind of said we don't want to necessarily get into it unless we can bring something new to the table or do something in a way that hasn't maybe quite been done before. You didn't want to get into that market just for the sake of getting into it, because that'd be easy enough.
Correct. We want to be able to bring something to it, something innovative.
Yep.
And apply what we've learned over the last 30 to 40 years to that market. How we manufacture things, the finishes that we use, the mindset that we've developed behind why we do what we do.
Yep. I think that makes a lot of sense. So that's a good, I guess that's kind of a goal. So let's look at goals this time of year. Yesterday we touched on the 90-day rule, and I thought that was really fascinating. I wasn't really familiar with it before yesterday. If you want to go into that.
So yeah, I've heard a couple different people say this. They say it a little bit differently, but kind of the same thing. Is that typically where we're at right now, good or bad, is a result of what we've been doing the last 60 to 90 days. So, people always talk, back to the whole setting a New Year's resolution. If we change things January 1, you honestly have to be 60 to 90 days out to see if those results are working.
Yeah. So you're saying making changes back at the end of the year where we are now.
Correct.
Back into November, October.
Yes. And they talk about like I said, good or bad, if you look back 90 days and what you were doing, it kind of will be a predictor of where you're at right now.
Yep.
And along those same lines, they talk about like the momentum that comes from that, where it's a very difficult thing to, once you lose momentum, whether it's toward a business goal, a weight loss goal, a financial goal, whatever it is, it requires twice as much energy to get going again in the right direction.
Yeah.
So I've always found, at least personally, it's much easier to stay on task with all the little details each day
than it is to start over.
Yes. And unfortunately, I've learned it the hard way on why that
happens. Well, I know like one analogy I use a lot, I'm sure my family members are absolutely over it because I say it so many times, is the idea of a boulder at the top of a hill, and you have to constantly rock the boulder back and forth and back and forth and back and forth to get it going down the hill. But once it starts rolling, you just have to keep nudging it.
Yes.
I use that a lot. And like I said, I'm sure my family's sick of hearing about it, but that's one that always sticks with me, that, rocking the boulder. I'll say that all the time.
And there's so many great analogies out there, and one that was kind of a eye opener for me was reading Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Yeah, great book.
He talks in there a lot about all you have to do is get 1% better each day. I think too many times we're looking, to get to our end goal, the instant gratification thing. We want to get to that end goal in, whatever it is, we want to do it by tomorrow.
Yeah, it's the society we live in that we expect, like, take action today, have results tomorrow type thing.
Correct. And what I have found is, you can take drastic measures. You can do different things to accelerate the process.
Mm-hmm.
But many times you're not learning the process to get there.
Yep.
So you'll end up falling back in whatever bad habits you had.
It's temporary success.
It's temporary success versus looking at it day by day, getting better where you can actually change your lifestyle habits.
Yeah.
Like he talks in the book, if you can get 1% or 1% better each day, at the end of the year, you'll be 37 times better at whatever it is.
Yeah. It's much easier to kind of digest that kind of strategy than it is to maybe look at the huge picture or try and take that all in at once.
Yes. And it's much easier, I think, for people to attain a goal. You can set that grandiose vision that you have on whatever it is.
Yep.
But then reverse engineer back. If you're looking at a 12-month goal, start reverse engineering it back to, where am I going to be in 30 days?
Yep. I like that.
Where am I going to be in 90 days? And then you can even take it all the way back. Where do I want to be 7 days from now?
Yeah. I love the idea of reverse engineering it because you can really map that out.
You can map it out, and it becomes it seems much more attainable at that point than just looking at that year-end goal.
Definitely.
And I have found that applies, it can apply to paying off a credit card. It can apply to, a weight loss goal. If you look at somebody, I've been there, 50 pounds overweight. That's a big task to try to lose 50 pounds when you're looking at it.
Yeah.
But if you break it down to 1 pound a week, it seems much more manageable, and it's much easier to figure out what you need to do to get to that.
Well, I kind of want to touch on something you mentioned yesterday regarding regarding things like that too, is I can't remember quite how you worded it, but don't look at like what you're depriving yourself of. Look at the positivity of like the end result.
Yeah, I read that where your attention, I'm going to paraphrase this, but basically your focus, how do I get it?
You'll get it.
Yeah, basically what you focus on is where your attention will be.
Yeah.
So you have to be very aware of, focusing on the positive aspect of trying to attain a goal.
Mm-hmm.
Like to use the weight loss analogy, if you constantly focus on the fact that you don't get to eat a certain food or you're depriving yourself of that food, the way the brain works, you're just going to want it that much more.
Yep.
Where if you can focus on the health benefits and all that, and then mix in, some of those things that you like to do.
Yep.
Eventually, and when you look at it from that consistency, day after day, week after week, it allows you to do some of that versus, some of these starvation diets that you restrict yourself. And then when you're done with it, next thing you know, you're eating everything you can see.
Yeah, because you check that box and then you revert right back to where you were.
And you didn't learn the habits that you need. And this applies, you don't have to be trying to do a weight loss thing. You can be doing a financial goal.
Yep.
A business goal, a startup company, whatever it is. You have to learn the process and change your habits day by day in order to get where you need to go.
Yeah, to put the building blocks in place to make that successful.
Yeah. And this is something I struggled with for a long time is I always wanted like the easy way out or a shortcut when it came to a goal.
Yeah, I just want to get there.
Just want to get there. So I would immerse myself in business books. A perfect example is something we take very serious here is our company culture.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very difficult thing, especially once you lose it. So I read book after book on what I need to do, but then it takes action and it takes, in many cases, difficult conversations.
Right.
So it was much easier for me to go order another book off of Amazon and read the other guy's idea on it.
Yeah. Which might be partially contradictory to the other idea.
Yes. Than it was to, just go have those conversations. I knew what needed to be done.
Yeah.
I knew what needed to be changed, and it obviously started with me. But it was easier just to keep reading, different ideas. And it's funny, as I went through that evolution, I also found I would gravitate towards books that kind of already agreed with what I was thinking.
Yeah, aligned with that worldview.
Yeah, so instead of challenging my narrative or challenging my belief system, I would find books and ideas that reaffirmed what I already thought.
Right, but still didn't necessarily lead to action on your part.
And a year went by, 3 years, 5 years would go by, and nothing changed.
Yep.
And I'm like, but I've read all these books. I've attended all these conferences. I've done these mastermind groups.
Yep.
But we're still back at square one. And
yep,
it was a hard realization to realize that nothing, you can do all that, but without taking action, nothing's going to happen.
Exactly. And I want to circle back a little bit. As you were talking about the reverse engineering your goals, where does routine come in? Is that kind of connected to the routine process, or where do you feel routine lies in, I guess, obtaining your goals, and how important is it?
So for me, it's imperative that I have a routine that I can stick to. Because without that, I will revert back to being complacent, being lazy, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, easy to make concessions again.
Easy to make concessions. So what I had to do, and like I said, everybody's individual, but for me, I had to set up a routine, and I have some non-negotiables in that routine.
And that'd be daily non-negotiables?
Daily non-negotiables that, unless I'm sick or, something, I'm going to get these certain things done every single day.
And this is not a list of 20 or 30 things, right? This is...
Because I think you set yourself up for failure when you have that list of 20 things.
Yep.
Or you make that list 20 just things that you're going to check a box on.
Yeah, you can,
but they don't really move the needle.
Yeah, you can micro tasks or whatever,
yes.
Whatever you want to call them.
You can, and if they are 20 important tasks, that's overwhelming. There's a good chance you're never going to get those done every day. So you set yourself up for failure that way.
Yeah.
So I'll set up typically a minimum of 3, but usually a maximum of 5. Important. I call them, a lot of people do the most important task of the day.
Yep.
And I will get those done in the morning. And that way it frees up. So as the afternoon comes, if something breaks out or there's chaos at work.
Yeah. The unforeseen things.
The unforeseen things that happen to all of us.
Yep.
I'm already done. I've already accomplished what I needed to get done that morning.
Yep.
So I can kind of run with it and do whatever. And it's, for a long time, I was very disciplined when I was at home, working in the office. I had complete control over everything that was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would travel for work, for vacation, whatever it was. And all those routines would go out the window.
Yeah. Change of environment.
And then when I came back, it would take me 7, 10, 14 days to kind of get back in the swing of things. And I finally learned, when I travel, I will still typically have these non-negotiables that I take care of.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's, like for one of them, for me, it's going to the gym.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, if I'm in a hotel, their gym might not be what I want it to be.
Sure.
But I can at least go do something, get my, heart pumping, my blood moving.
And maintain that
Even
routine.
If it's only 15 to 20 minutes, it kind of sets the tone for the rest of the day.
Yeah. It flips that switch in your mind. Like I said, the gym itself may not be what you're used to at a hotel, but it's checking that box, flipping that switch, putting that success in.
And the big thing that it does is you keep that commitment to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a firm believer that if you don't keep the commitments that you make to yourself, how on earth does anybody else expect you to keep commitments to them?
Yeah, definitely.
And every time you fail in that commitment to yourself, you're kind of chipping away at your self-confidence.
Mm-hmm.
Where And I've learned this, like I said, the hard way, but by going to hit that, whatever it was, 20-minute gym session and getting a little work done, from the hotel, it reaffirmed that I was able to keep that commitment to myself. It helps with self-confidence. And the biggest thing is when I get back, it's much easier to get back in the normal swing of things.
Because you really never broke routine.
Right. I'm not having to reinvent the wheel to get going again.
Yeah, that's great advice, because I think...
And I was just going to add one other thing to that. It's funny because I've had people say, my wife included, don't you get tired of sticking to that routine?
Mm-hmm.
But to me, it helps eliminate anxiety and being overwhelmed.
Yep.
Because if I don't do that, I'm going to think about it all day long.
Yeah.
So this way, I'm just going to do it, get it done. And then I can enjoy myself the rest of the day if I'm on vacation or doing whatever without in the back of my mind saying, when could I get this done? Or I can't believe I didn't do this. I've failed myself.
Well, it kind of goes back to our friend Brandon Lilly, his philosophy on +1 and how to make your day a +1. You can kind of take your day as a cumulative effect, and it's either +1 or -1 on the decisions you make that day.
Yes.
And setting yourself up for success right off the bat with the non-negotiables, I think, can really make it easy for you to say the day was a +1, even if you get derailed after lunch or...
And it allows me to, yes, I'm very regimented in that routine, but it actually provides me more freedom as the day goes on.
Yep. Yeah, that's awesome.
And you touched on something there too with Brandon Lilly, and something that I always recommend to people is a lot of all the self-improvement, goal setting, all those different areas.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people pretty much say all the same thing.
Sure.
And I've learned this from reading all the different books, trying to put off the work. But a lot of them will always say the same thing. But the biggest thing that has helped me is you have to find somebody that resonates with you.
Yeah, that connects with your voice, or
correct, that you can buy into.
Yep.
Yes. And then the second piece of that puzzle, at least for me, has been to take what I learned from that person and then figure out how it applies to my particular lifestyle.
Sure.
When I was younger and I would, go to different conferences or masterminds, whatever it was, I would come back and try to implement every single thing I learned.
Like almost try and plug and play it right into your life. Yeah.
And it was, once again, a recipe for disaster because, yes, it worked for a week or 2 weeks. But this person that I may have gone and watched doesn't have kids.
Yep.
So what they can do at night is different than what I can do with, raising 3 kids.
Mm-hmm.
But once I was able to take the information and apply it to my life, it was a complete game changer in the way I set goals, achieved outcomes, and just it eliminated a lot of stress for me.
I think you touched on something there, and maybe you can dig even a little deeper on that, is being realistic. So as we look at kind of a combination of goal setting, reverse engineering them, getting in the routine, where does being realistic come into play? Is there, I guess, a system that you like to use as far as what you can attain and how fast? Is there a way that you like to look at that or break that down? Like, I should really be here in about 3 months. I should really be here in about a year. That way, is there a balance between being realistic and how much action you should be taking consistently?
I think there is. And I'm a big believer in you should always be taking action.
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, you have to be realistic about it. There's certain seasons of the year, obviously, and I'm not referring to, like the 4 seasons, but, let's say we're heading into, we just came off of Thanksgiving, we're heading into Christmas. Yes, you can stick to your diet, you can stick to your routine and everything, but I think it's a perfect example. If you're going to be realistic, more than likely, this is not a great time to try and lose weight.
Yeah, or start a new diet.
Yeah. Maybe you should work towards maintenance over the next few weeks and just not lose what you've gained.
Yeah.
If it's a financial goal, you have to be realistic of what you can save or what you can pay down. If you make X, and right now there's no other way that you can make any additional money. I mean, there's obviously limitations to what you can do.
Right. If you write a huge check each month and pay a credit card bill way down, but you can't pay your other bills, that's not realistic.
Correct. And this is where I always go back to, too many people, too many times, I think, want to look at the big goal. but it's
the flashy one.
the flashy one.
Yeah.
It's all those little decisions that you make each day that to me is what gets you to where you want to go.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be perfect in that decision making. You're allowed to reward yourself. You're allowed to, take some time to yourself here and there.
Yeah. Enjoy life.
But back to you, like you said with Brandon, if you can win each day at the end of the year, you've had a pretty good year.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a good way to put it. So and we talked about Brandon a little bit. I know you're also, and we've had Mike DeSanti on the podcast as well. And I know you're a big believer in a lot of his philosophy. If you want to touch on that, as far as what you have to do to be happy.
And I'll do that, but I want to circle back to one other thing real quick before I forget. Is one of the things what you were talking about, goal setting, that I think is huge, and it's been said a million different times, but it's because it's true, is make sure you are surrounding yourself with people that are going to create that environment for you to succeed.
Right. That's huge.
If you're around people that are constantly pushing you, you're going to get better.
Yep.
If you're around people that constantly are dragging you down, you're going to, it's like in sports, they always talk about people play to their competition level.
Yep.
Up or down to their competition level. If you're surrounding yourself with people that are constantly dragging you down, it's impossible to keep pushing forward.
Yeah. If they're complacent, you'll end up complacent.
Yes. Yeah. And you'll feel good about yourself because you're like, well, I'm not, I'm not as complacent as they are.
Right. Yeah. I'm not as bad. Yep.
Yeah. So that was one thing that's always been big for me, is when I started putting myself in the right environment, whether it's people, even, all the way around, your office for distractions, your home for food.
Yep.
It takes a lot less willpower and discipline if you set yourself up for success.
Yeah.
Which just takes a little bit of planning.
Yeah. If you're struggling at the office, you need to silence the phone and, silence the phone. If you're struggling at home or, with a diet, keep junk food out of the house or keep certain temptations out of the house, set those boundaries and then you really set yourself up for success.
It comes down to, people talk a lot of times they don't have time.
Yeah.
But yet they've watched every Netflix series that's come out in the last 5 years. Yeah. They can tell you every single post that's been on Facebook today.
Well, that goes back to what we talked about yesterday for best priorities.
Yes, you have to. If something's a priority, everything else has to work from there.
Mm-hmm.
And my best example of that is, and this goes back to the podcast we did with Dr. Parsley about sleep.
Yep.
I was one of those guys who always thought I only needed 4 or 5 hours of sleep. I didn't have time to sleep. I had too much stuff going on. And I finally had to, just back to the reverse engineering thing, say, okay, I'm going to get up at 5:30.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm going to get 7 to 8 hours of sleep, I have to plan for that the night before.
Yep.
And it's amazing, once I start doing that with my sleep, how many of my other habits and everything fell into place.
Well, I think for some reason we tend to want to wear that as a badge of honor, is that, I worked till midnight and then I was up at 5 back at it. And there's only so long you can sustain that. I think according to him, it's within like a day or two that you start to have like,
he was talking about like
sharp.
And like 1 to 2 hours, if you only get 5 to 6 hours, there'll be effects the next day, regardless of whether or not you think there will be or not.
Yeah. And then it compounds, correct? If you're losing 1 to 2 hours a night for 2, 3, 4, 5 a week or more, it actually compounds, correct?
Yes. That's all the research he's done. And it's amazing. People will buy all these supplements. They'll do all these things, when one of the best things we can do for ourselves is 100% free. It's just
get good sleep.
Yeah. So I didn't mean to go down that rabbit hole, but you had asked,
great.
Something that I had learned from Mike DeSanti, back to goal setting, back to just an amazing way to live your life, is this is something he explained to me. He's not the originator of this idea.
Mm-hmm.
I know like Tony Robbins and Stephen Covey, they've talked about it, and I think it's probably been done before them.
Yep.
But it's the philosophy of be, do, have.
Be, do, have. Okay.
And what he explained to me is, a lot of people have a victim's mindset, and they live by the philosophy of have, do, be, which is, when I have enough time, when I have enough money, or when I reach this goal, then I will do the things that I've always wanted to do, and then I will be happy and successful.
Mm-hmm.
Where he explained to me, and it makes a lot of sense when you sit down and think about it, is it should be do, have. By doing that, basically you look at it, so like, who do I need to be the person that I want to be,
mm-hmm.
to achieve the outcomes that I'm looking for? And then once I figure out that, what do I have to do to get to be that person?
Kind of goes back to your reverse engineering point.
Correct.
Earlier.
And then once I do that, I will have that happiness, that feeling of fulfillment and success that we are all looking for. And the first time he brought that up to me, I'm like, okay, whatever, that doesn't really make sense.
Right.
But then it's one of those things when you start looking around at and really self-reflecting on my life. I was very guilty of that. I'll start traveling more when I'm this age.
Yep.
Once I make this amount of money, then we'll be able to do this.
Yep. Well, it's easy to fall into that.
And it's easy to fall into that. And you never really get there because you don't learn the basics of how it all works.
Right. Well, then I think you miss out on so much. I think we get caught in that trap of happiness will be when.
Yes.
And that's not necessarily how it works either. It's something that you have to craft kind of day to day and be conscious of, and not falling into that, I don't want to say cause effect, but falling into that trap of, if I just have this or just get to this point, then I'll do X.
Yeah, because in at least the way I see it is when you have that philosophy, if I have this, or when you achieve that, or when you finally reach that, you're just going to want something more.
That's how I was just going to go there. Is typically what happens is, I'll be happy if I can just make enough to get this vehicle. And then you get that vehicle and you start thinking, well, if I can do this, I can get this vehicle.
And it goes along with what Mike talks a lot about in his New Man Emerging book, is the philosophy of one day is a myth. We always tell ourselves, kind of go back to the be, do, have. One day I will be able to do this. Mm-hmm. One day I'll be able to do that. But we never really get to that one day unless we start now.
That's true. Yeah. That's a great, I'm kind of like wanting to jot that down. I think that's a great point right there.
And it's been, at least for me, it's been very beneficial to surround myself with certain, be willing to go get some coaching, be willing to put myself in the right environment to learn from some amazing people.
Yeah, be willing to ask questions.
Yes. And the ironic thing about me doing that, and for so many people, is for so many years, I tried doing that whole lone wolf method of, I'm a man, whatever that means, that I don't need to ask questions. I'll figure it out on my own.
Yep.
It's not very manly to go ask somebody for questions.
People can watch it happen.
Yeah. And I've talked about this a lot on other podcasts, is even in our business, I'd always be like, our business is different than everybody else's. Mm-hmm. It's a family business, for one. It's in the firearms business. Mm-hmm. So what I told myself is what works at all these other companies isn't going to be what works for us.
Yeah, I'm going to figure it out.
Because I'll figure it out because we're different.
Yep.
And I could not have been more wrong.
At least you admit it now.
Because once I started listening to other business owners, talking to other business owners, be willing to say, hey, I don't know. Let's try to figure it out.
Yep.
Is when we were able to start growing our business exponentially through that.
Yeah. I think that's being willing to learn and ask questions, I think, is a huge, huge deal.
And I think it's important to say, I don't know.
Yeah. Hard thing to say.
And then there's that balance of saying, I don't know, and then trying to read books and learn, and then finally taking action.
Yeah. That kind of brings everything kind of full circle, is knowing when to stop that learning process and start acting. Yep.
Yes. Because ultimately it comes down to making a decision and then taking action on that decision. And then you can always reassess if it's not working out.
Yeah. And I don't want to get too far in the weeds in this, but as far as reassessment, what do you recommend there? When do people look at what is working and what doesn't? And, when do they pivot?
I think it depends on the goal, but I'm very big on taking notes and recording different things.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily, constantly analyzing those, but it can be as simple as writing down 1 to 2 things about a certain day towards a certain goal.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end of maybe 30 days, looking at it and be like, okay, this is when things were going good.
Mm-hmm.
Not so good here. When they were going good, I was doing more of this.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times we overcomplicate what it is.
Sure, I can see that.
We overcomplicate trying to get to that point where, I'll come back to what we said multiple times throughout this podcast is many times we know what we need to do.
Yeah.
We just avoid the difficult work to do it.
Yeah. It's easy to avoid the work.
And I feel comfortable saying that because that's still my tendency today.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm way better now than I was 20 years ago.
Sure.
20 years ago, I would do everything and everything possible to avoid like having to put in the work to get to a certain goal.
I think that's huge, is just making sure that you're assessing and being honest with yourself and making even small changes, kind of like we discussed earlier. Being willing to make small changes doesn't have to be drastic changes.
And I think we can close on this. One other thought on this is, whatever it is that you're looking for, instead of following 100 different people trying to figure it out,
mm-hmm.
I always suggest try to follow 1 to 2, because that way you can really apply what they're doing,
mm-hmm.
To your life, where it's so easy to get information overload when you start having 100 different people that you're trying to follow.
Yeah, definitely. Especially when, kind of like you said earlier, their lives may not apply it. So you're really trying to plug and play really minute pieces of information if their life doesn't fit in with how your life is.
Correct.
Find those 2 that really resonate, right?
Yes. And I had another thought on that. I've lost my train of thought. But it was.
See if it comes back to you.
Yeah.
I don't know if it will.
It's gone blank.
Yeah. On the spot. Won't happen.
Yes. I'll remember it as soon as we quit recording, but it was.
We'll have to plug it. It was plug it into the show notes.
It was my final point that I was going to make regarding this, and I've completely lost it.
We'll have to plug it. We'll plug it into the bottom.
Oh, it was along these lines of, it did kind of come back to me here. When you find these people, search for people that are doing what you want to do,
mm-hmm.
where you want to be, and then kind of look at how they got there. Whether it's a career path, whether it's, a fitness path, a financial goal, kind of, dive into how they got there,
mm-hmm.
and really study that side of it so you don't get that overwhelm of trying to do what everybody does.
Sure. I think that's a really good point.
And if possible, reach out and try to meet that particular person that's doing what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that's been very big for me is, you follow somebody online, but then you got to, if at all possible, put yourself in that room with that person,
mm-hmm.
because 1 of 2 things will happen. That person will either be 100% who they portray themselves to be, and it allows you to buy in that much more.
Yep.
Or what you'll find is that person's fake as hell.
In the digital world we live in.
In the digital world that you live in. And it's time to go find somebody else to learn from.
Yeah.
But always try to be learning.
Even if you're going down the path, keep learning.
Yes. I've been doing like our business for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, 20, too many years. But you always have to be learning to keep growing and succeeding at what you're doing.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And that's kind of, I think, a perfect way to kind of wrap this up. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, thoughts, shoot them over to us at podcast@volquartsen.com. We will check them out. Any additional thoughts there, Scott?
No, if you have any questions on anything we talked about, let us know.
We could definitely dive into more of these. We're big fans of this type stuff.
Yeah, so very passionate about it. It's, this self-development path has changed my life from who I was 10, 15 years ago.
Yep.
So I'm very passionate at all things regarding it. And I've made a lot of mistakes along the way. But I feel like I've also been around, been very fortunate over the last few years. So
to connect with some really cool people.
So it's something that I really enjoy. So yeah, love to talk about it. If you want to, like Chad said, if you're into more of these episodes, let us know.
Yeah. Any questions, anything we should dive deeper into? Again, that's podcast.volquartsen.com. Thanks for listening.